Well, let's get some analysis now with Kamil Zwolski, who's the Jean Monnet Chair of European Security and Governance at Southampton University. He joins us now from Southampton in the UK. Thank you so much for joining us. Can I start by asking you firstly about the prospect of nuclear weapons being deployed? We heard just a moment ago that Russia has put its arsenal on standby. Are there any real fears that that might be deployed?
Well, whenever this kind of rhetoric is being used, there are always fears, and I think one positive thing here in this situation is that there seems to be understanding on all sides that this would be a tremendous tragedy, and the United States seems to kind of appreciate that, so they have postponed the testing of their own nuclear weapons. Russia seems to understand that too, but I think they are kind of using it as a part of kind of exercising pressure on Ukraine, but especially on the West. I think Russia is kind of surprised with the severity of the response, with the scale of support for Ukraine coming from the European Union and other countries. So I think this is all part of a kind of diplomatic language, diplomatic discussion in this case, although, this language shouldn't be used because there is always this kind of concern.
We heard just a short time ago from the Ukrainian President Zelensky speak to the world's media in Kiev. One of the main points that he raised was this idea of a military-enforced no-fly zone over Ukraine. He once again appealed to Western nations to enforce such a measure. He said that would be a good way to perhaps bring this conflict to an end. But we know that leaders like Joe Biden and other Western powers have refused to entertain the idea of enforcing a no-fly zone over Ukraine, saying that it would draw them directly into the conflict. Do you believe that it's time now for such a measure to be used, as the Ukrainian president has suggested?
No, it's not, unfortunately. I mean, it is totally acceptable and easy to understand why, if you are in Ukraine, you would welcome such a measure. And, perhaps if I was kind of a citizen of Ukraine now, kind of sheltering somewhere in Kiev, I could totally sympathize with that request. But from the perspective of international kind of broader security, that would potentially be a disaster. So I think because it's not about announcing a no-fly zone, it's not about implementing it, it's about enforcing it, right? How do you enforce it? What does it mean in practice? In practice, it means you are shooting Russian airplanes down. And that links back to our first question, the question of nuclear weapons. There has to be a different kind of solution found, a diplomatic solution. War with Russia, I would say, is not a viable solution to this problem.
Our correspondent who just updated us from Ukraine had said that Ukrainians are generally quite pessimistic about these peace talks that are currently being brokered between Russia and Ukrainian officials. They say that perhaps it's more for show rather than anything else. Do you believe that President Vladimir Putin is interested in actually ending this conflict, or are these peace talks that are happening in Belarus just for show?
I think one thing doesn't exclude the other. I think that the peace talks are important, but at the same time, we have learned that this invasion has been in preparation for at least 1 year. So I don't think it was in preparation for that long. And I don't think that President Putin took such a great risk to finish this operation, this invasion, without or before achieving its objective. And the objective is to quote him, to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. Now, how do you denazify a country? Let's put aside the fact that, of course, Ukraine is not a Nazi country, but how would you do that if you believe that it is? Of course, you need to change the government. Of course, you need to occupy its capital, if only to install a new government, right? How do you demilitarize a country? You need to have some kind of control And so Russia doesn't seem to have yet achieved its military and political objectives. Having said that, every opportunity for discussions, I think, should be taken and should be exploited. And because of that, I also believe that the efforts by Emmanuel Macron are really to be valued. There has to be a channel of communication, right? It's one thing to punish Russia. It's one thing to isolate Russia, but there have to be channels of diplomatic communications open as much as possible.
Yes, now in terms of Emmanuel Macron, we know that he's sat down with President Vladimir Putin in the lead up to its assault on Ukraine. He also just reported that he had spoken to Vladimir Putin just a couple of hours ago, and he told the media in France that Putin was looking to completely execute his goals in Ukraine. You say that one of his aims would be to change the government or administration in Ukraine. Others believe that he's looking for a wholesale takeover of the country. Do you believe that's ultimately what Putin wants as well, a takeover of Ukraine?
That kind of speculation is really difficult because we cannot predict what will happen in the next hour, let alone in the next week or month. It is possible that this kind of objective is on the table. If it is, that means that, I would have to question, how rational those kind of objectives are, because it would be next to impossible to kind of incorporate the whole country and then control it. Ukraine is a large country. So it's difficult to say. Russian side is reassuring everyone that this is absolutely not an objective. They don't want to occupy Ukraine, but at the same time, those soldiers that were accumulated on the Ukrainian borders, they were meant to be for exercise purposes only. So it's really hard to say. And anyone who claims that they know for sure what is going to happen, well, it's impossible to know.
Okay, Kamil Zwolski from Southampton University. We'll have to leave it there, but thanks very much for sharing your analysis with us on TRT World.